Hey everyone, welcome back to Behind the Page. I'm CJ, and today I'm joined by the great Dennis Culver. We're going to be talking about Unstoppable Doom Patrol, writing comics, and a lot more. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah. So when I have new people on the show, new writers, usually one of the first things I ask is how long you've been reading comics and if there were any specific characters or runs that really interest you in the medium.
Oh man, I've been reading comics one way or another since I was 4 years old. Like I learned to draw by copying like the funnies in the funny papers. Like that was some of my first drawings was like copying Snoopy and stuff like that. Like I was given a comic at a very young age. I was a fan of a lot of the superhero TV shows. So they've always been a part of my life. And then, having an interest in drawing and then ultimately writing, just kind of it's something I could never get away from. Like, even if I took a break from comics, it always came back into
hmm Yeah, you
my life.
mentioned I know that you started more drawing comics than writing. What was that transition like as well?
I was drawing a lot of stuff when I started doing Edison Rex with Chris Robertson. We kind of were generating the plots together. We were talking a lot about it. Sometimes I would write up what I thought the issue would be. Sometimes we'd even do it Marvel style, where we would, I'd go and just do all the panels and he'd fill it in. And it was essentially we're getting kind of co-writing it as we got deeper into the process. And he gave me a lot of confidence in storytelling and writing, and just by giving me the freedom to like hear my voice and let me speak. He was a real true collaborator in that regard. And I noticed when I was working in other comics, I would have a lot of opinions about story, and so eventually. I was like, well, let me just try this on my own and see about maybe drawing something for someone, or rather writing something for someone else to draw, and see what that looks like. Because I've written my own stories that I've drawn, but it's a little bit different process when you bring in that other person. It's something I've really come to enjoy, especially when you get to make comics with your buddies. It's the best, like you just you're having fun, but you're getting paid and you're doing stuff, so it's always
Yeah,
great.
that's cool. Yeah, and I can imagine too, coming from the more artist side of things, that probably helps when you're making a script as a writer too. It helps with that writer-artist relationship.
Yeah, if you dig deep enough on a lot of writers in comics, not all of them, but there's quite a few. A lot of the big writers specifically, they all started drawing one way or another, and that includes Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, Brian Bendis, Ed Brubaker. They all have comics that they've drawn themselves, or drawings that they do, or pages that they've done. So it's definitely, I think sometimes I my drawing ability doesn't quite hit as much as I want it to be, and so writing gives me the ability to work with someone who's way more skilled and comes up with way harder ways to do it than my brain would, which is always fun. It's one of the joys with working with Burnham because he always goes for it. When we're working on Unstoppable Doom Patrol, sometimes I'll make little sketches of how I think the pages should look. I never show him those. It's just to kind of help me clarify the script. And then when he turns in his sketches of the pages, it's like, oh man, he did it the hard way every time. And it's just like, it always looks amazing. It always looks super cool. So,
That's cool, yeah. So you brought up Doom Patrol. I'd love to talk about that book because it was definitely one of my favorite of the Dawn of DC books. And not just
all
me,
right, on.
I've
Thank you.
seen so many people online praise it. I had Mark Waid on the show about a year ago, and he brought up that he was loving what you were doing on the title. My love for Doom Patrol started when maybe 2021 when I caught up with what was out of the HBO show so far. And then from there, I borrowed my friend's copies of the Morrison run and
Right.
started reading a bunch from there. So I was wondering both how you got the opportunity to write this book and how you got into the Doom Patrol in general.
I was reading Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol probably just the right age. I was like 16, 17, maybe even a little younger, but I was definitely like digging around on that stuff. And then I was just like, what is this? And like kind of that encouraged me to start looking at the older issues of Doom Patrol and then kind of keep up and follow the new series as they were happening. But I was a super fan of the series. And it's something that I've followed, all of my time in comics is since I picked up that first Grant Morrison issue, in Richard Case. But it was just, I liked that outsider thing. I'm a fan of the X-Men too, and I think there's obvious parallels between those two things, and they've gone in completely different directions. But I think those team of outsiders is a super interesting concept to me, and so that's probably what's kept me sticking around
Hmm.
with that group.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up that I was gonna ask what you would say is so special about the Doom Patrol for people who haven't read them before. I think it really is that like whole theme of being an outsider, because it's there are obviously those parallels with the X-Men, but I what I always thought was really special about the Doom Patrol is the fact that it's not like they were born with these things. They were kind of accidents that happened to them along the way.
Yeah, it's almost more of a parable for living with disabilities, and that's it's kind of some of the themes that we hit on when we were talking about saving the world by saving the monsters. It's, if you suddenly are a metahuman in the DC universe, if you suddenly have powers, you suddenly got tentacles for arms. There's a lot of basic stuff that you have to figure out. Like you got to figure out how to tie your shoes again. You got to figure out how to brush your teeth. Which is, when somebody has an accident, suddenly faced with disability, it's a very similar process. It's relearning how to do a lot of basic things in your life. And when I was talking about that with Burnham and kind of going back and forth, I kind of realized that it's really interesting because it's something that doesn't get touched on a lot in comics. And so kind of like delving into that became a really interesting hook for us with Doom Patrol.
Yeah, that's really cool. I know that you've always been a big Robot Man fan too, which is really clear. He's super cool in this book. I was wondering if there's any other members of the team, not to say that you didn't like them before or anything, but through writing them, you feel like you came to care about them a lot more.
I think like I grew up Beast Girl, like it was a character I brought into it, but quickly became Burnham's favorite character. And the more he drew her and developed her, like I loved that character more and more just because of his love for that character. It was like his drawings and the way the mannerisms he would have her portray started suggesting a personality to me, and even an origin and kind of like figuring out how she works. I wasn't expecting to enjoy Niles Calder because he's been a villain in the book largely, but kind of having him kind of get past that, and instead of trying to be the guy that takes charge of everything, to just recognize that it's not his turn anymore, and that he's there to kind of facilitate and help, really brought me to a place where I could really like and understand that character in a fun way.
That's
So yeah, definitely him. I do love all of the characters. I think Cliff is just easy to get into because of that kind of he's got that same attitude as the Thing in Hellboy. It's just that blue collar, like show me what to hit and I'll hit it, and that's like it's always an easy attitude to latch on to. Whereas other characters can be a little more complicated, but I feel like we found a good place for their voices.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I found really cool while I was reading Unstoppable Doom Patrol is with a lot of the characters, I didn't even realize it till halfway through the issue, but in my head I'm reading them with the voices from the TV show. Like it just feels like it
Oh
fits in
yeah, isn't
overall
that?
tone so
Yeah,
well.
that's great. Yeah, you can't. It's I mean, forever now, Robot Man will always have Brendan Fraser's voice.
Right,
Like you
yeah.
cannot get away from that. Like that is just who he is. The same with Larry and Rita Farr.
Yeah.
Like it's just definitely those voices stick.
The scene when I think I first realized that was it was in issue 3 when they were in the car and it was Cliff talking to Larry about Starbro and his name in the back. Like I just
Right, right.
realized as I was going through, like, man, these just like it feels like I'm watching the show. This is so cool.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of intent too, because the show was obviously going on, and there was a lot of fans of that. And I felt like there's going to be fans that only found the Doom Patrol through the TV show that were going to pick up this comic, and I wanted the comic to feel close enough to those characters that they would feel comfortable doing that. Like this is the comic book that happens maybe a few years down the line after the show, and so we tried to make it do that while still honoring the past issues and still feeling like something fresh for someone who's never even heard of
Mhm.
any of the Doom Patrol walking in on it was just a fan of the Dom DC line. And I feel like we did a good job of hitting all those points. It's a tough order to fill, but I think Burnham and I nailed it.
I think you guys did too. Came out great. I love reading it. I was rereading it just recently, and it's still definitely one of my favorite books from that relaunch.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course, yeah. I was also wondering too if you have any favorite team dynamics within the Doom Patrol. Like I brought up Cliff and Larry before, how it's so much fun reading their banter. I can imagine too it's really cool seeing characters like Beast Girl, who you brought onto the team, interact with these pre-established members too.
Yeah, yeah, I think Beast Girl and Degenerate's dynamic is
Hmm.
interesting, because he's this big meanie and she's this big softie, and that's always fun to put them together. I think Beast Girl has a cool dynamic with Cliff too that I'd love to explore more. I think picking up on some of the things that were suggested in previous runs. I think Rita and Flex Mentallo together is a
Hmm.
very interesting dynamic, which they kind of hinted at the show too. So it kind of all fit together in the soup. But yeah, getting the core three on the page together is always great. And then I think the chief and Jane and the various alters, they all have their own relationships, and I love when one of the alters appears. It's like it's a whole new like dynamic with that character, and that's super fun to me. Like just you can kind of it's a real wild card. You can kind of throw gasoline on the fire at any given
Hmm.
moment with that. So it's always
Yeah.
fun dramatically.
That's cool. Yeah, I wanted to bring up Jane and her alters, like you said. I know I've seen online you've said that the identity of the chief in Jane existed before she met the chief, and it manifested into that leadership role as time went on. Shy is another one we also see for the first time in this series. I was wondering how much fun it is to come up with these alters and if there were any plans for more.
Yeah, it's kind of like there's so many that have been hinted at or just mentioned by name, and so those are ones that you kind of want to touch on too. I try not to if it's just a name, like, there's not a lot to go on. But like, with Chainsaw Nun, that was something that Burnham and I were just super interested in. And like, she only appears in a panel. It's just a nun holding a chainsaw. And on the TV show, it just appears Cecilia, just an old lady nun holding the chainsaw. There's never a lot of depth given to her. And so when we were going to put her in that the Lazarus Planet story, I was like, well, how would that manifest? And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if she had chainsaw hands, like, like Chainsaw Man? And so
Hmm.
Burnham was excited to draw that. And then, like, kind of, you can just see like how the flesh is giving way to the chainsaw. And in his mind, it's like the teeth of the chainsaw are like bits of bone, like Burnham really thought it out. Like, if you look close, you can tell that's what he's intending when he draws. And it's super fun to bring that out. But it is the kind of thing where I don't have like a map of all the unidentified alters. Like, you want to leave some for other writers to pick up down the line. But the fact that there are 64 of them and I'm roughly half have only been established
Yeah,
is pretty exciting, and it gives you a lot of latitude and a lot of potential for story.
it is really cool. Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, I would read a whole 6 issues on Chainsaw Nun alone too.
Yeah, that'd be a fun comic.
Yeah,
Just a really gory one. I don't know if we would get permission to do that, but
yeah,
Burnham would
maybe
have a
for Black
blast drawing
Label.
it. That's for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Another note on Doom Patrol that I just have written down. Like I said, issue 3, I brought it up. It was one of my favorites, and we get to see a direct flashback to the Morrison run when they go inside the painting, and the Justice League are there. I'm a huge Mr. Miracle Scott Free fan. This is not really a question, but I thought it would just be fun to bring up. Uh, from what I've read and all the research I did too, I'm pretty sure that flashback scene is the only new comic that came out in all of 2023 that Mr. Miracle showed up in. So. Mr. Miracle fans have to thank you for that cameo, I think.
Oh, that's probably true. Yeah, yeah. There was a Mr. Miracle book the previous year, right? But that was
Yeah.
Shiloh. Or maybe that was 2021. Yeah, but yeah, you might be right about that.
Mhm.
I wouldn't know for sure, but yeah, there's a Barda book that just came out. It's a
For Free
YA
Comic Book
book.
Day, I got that, yeah.
But I haven't. I didn't look. I don't know if Mr. Miracle's in that, but I would assume he's
Mhm.
has some presence in that. But yeah, that's pretty fun.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
then transitioning a little bit away from Doom Patrol, another book that I really enjoyed was Night Terrors, and it had a lot of great tie-ins, Satana being one of them. that I was wondering what the process of writing that was and what it was like being able to bring Robot Man into that story too.
It was interesting because Night Terrors, when Doom Patrol was starting, uh, we knew it was happening, but Doom Patrol was still, as they were putting that together, Doom Patrol wasn't out yet, so they didn't know what the sales of Doom Patrol were, so they didn't know if Doom Patrol would get its own Night Terrors special. They were like, probably not, just because of the timing. And so that was a bummer because there was going to be a little bit of a gap between while the Night Terrors books were going on, and it was like, how can I really wanted to have a Night Terror special, but it just the stars didn't align quickly enough for that. And then simultaneous to that, when Josh Williamson was writing it, he was like, "Hey, do you mind if I mention the Doom Patrol in the first issue of Night Terrors?" Like he just wanted to show like all the members passed out and only Robot Man awake, And it was like I was like, "Yeah, that's cool." Any opportunity to have our version of the Doom Patrol appear elsewhere in the DC universe, I'm always open for it. And then as all of that was happening, I got assigned the Zatanna book, which tied into a lot with what Josh was doing. And basically, it just came down to Zatanna needed someone to help her, and I knew that from Josh, Robot Man was one of the few people still awake during this event, and so I was just like, "Hey, can't you same editor as Doom Patrol?" I was like, "You mind if I use Robot Man?" And my pitch was like, she just calls blindly, casts a spell out into the darkness, like send me someone to help. And it's Cliff, and she's not happy about that
Yeah.
because when her dad died, there was another member of the Doom Patrol there, and so she just has like complicated feelings, like they're the weirdos, and
Hmm.
like she just is never really connected to them, and that was something I discovered. Other than in like a couple of random comics, they never really appeared on panel together, and uh, they never interacted in any sort of continuity, so they had never met. And
Hmm.
it was like that's kind of amazing to me, when you consider the history of DC Comics and all
Yeah.
these comics that are constantly put out every year. To find two characters that have never met each other before is pretty cool. And so being able to do that and kind of put them together where they kind of don't like each other, and then they finally come together as friends, and just when we do that, we take it away. And so I had a blast writing it. I got to have a little stealth Doom Patrol part of the crossover, and then still get to tell a really fun story about Zatanna, and all her complicated feelings about the death of her father, and just like the responsibility she bears with her powers and things like that. It was a whole lot of fun. It was just kind of kismet how it all came together, and it was just able to work out, and just finding the right angles. But
Yeah, that's
yeah, it was rad. Yeah, I would love to see those two team up again, because I think
that
they
would
have
be
a
really
good
cool.
chemistry that I wasn't expecting when I wrote it.
Hmm. Another one of the coolest parts of that book is I forget the official name for it, but the Night Terror's cliff design, like the nightmare version, is just like a super cool look.
Oh yeah, yeah, with the what were they called? The Knights,
Insomniacs, like
Sleepless Nights, the
yeah, yeah.
Sleepless Nights. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, and it was having the Sleepless Queen stab him with the sword, and that converts him into a Sleepless Knight. Yeah, that was cool. That was all Dave Baldbion.
Oh yeah,
Like I was like, the only thing I saw was like the kind of crown thing with his exposed brain, and then everything else was what he came up with, and it's just so rad. Like
hmm,
he did a really killer job on all of that book.
that's really cool.
I also all the maze stuff. Like there was the
Oh yeah,
page where it's the maze and there's panels in the maze. That was all him. Like I was like, they're walking through the maze and they're doing this, and he integrated the panels into the maze like that. And it was genius. It was like
that's
he's
really cool.
really good with handling like horror and suspense. And yeah, I'd love to do more of that with him, especially too.
That would be really cool to read. Yeah, I would definitely check that out. What's the process like of working on the story for one of those tie-in books for a bigger event? Do you have to be really close in communication with the person leading the event to make sure that it doesn't like intersect or cause any plot holes, anything like that?
They basically usually you get a document that is like kind of outlining the event and what's going on. Every event I've done has been a little different, if I'm being honest. Like, it just depends on what's how interconnected the event is, and what you're working on. But I'm also I've known Josh for years. When I first moved out to California, he was my comics retailer. So him and he's someone I talk to nearly daily.
Mhm.
And if I'm having a story problem or he's having a story problem, a lot of times we'll call each other and just talk it out, and stuff like that. So I definitely knew more about what was happening just because he was doing it. Um, but there's usually a document, and you submit an outline to your editor, and then they usually run it through. But it's a pretty streamlined process at this point because they've been doing crossovers, at least one a year for a long time. So
Yeah.
uh yeah, you're never thrown too far into the deep end of the pool. There's always some sort of life reserve in there.
Hmm. That's cool. So going back to, you brought up how cool it was to have Zatanna and Robot Man interact for the first time. I had a question that kind of has to do with that. So recently you wrote a story in the Batman Superman World's Finest annual starring Metamorpho. And what I found
Right.
really interesting is that you didn't just pull from Metamorpho's already existing supporting cast like Sapphire and Simon Stagg. You and Travis Mercer created Montana Mason, Metamorpho's father, for that story. And you've also, as we talked about, created characters like Beast Girl, Degenerate, Alters for Jane, and even the Batwoman who laughs. That I was wondering how it feels to be able to directly contribute and leave a mark on DC's already rich history like that.
Oh yeah, that's super fun. I mean, also finding ways to do that is always good. I mean, I'm a big believer of like, you know, creating new characters, using existing characters, using things that people have used in the past. Just kind of finding ways to put all of that together. I do love finding little bits that have not been pieces of territory that have not been explored. Like, every Metamorpho story is usually Simon Stagg is somehow and his daughter and
Mhm.
they're all like kind of centered in that story, and it's been done a lot. And what I came to realize, I was like, we've never even heard of or met Rex's parents. And I was like, that's super interesting to me. And it's like knowing he was a soldier of fortune. And it's like, what if he was just like his dad, but there's conflict there? And it's just finding that, like I said, with characters that have been around for decades, and you're able to find some kind of new facet of that character that you can kind of explore is super fun. And if you get to make a new character in the process too, I mean, that's always great as well. Um, but yeah, I look to do that kind of stuff. Hopefully, there'll be writers down the line to pick up stuff I leave on the table and just keep it moving. I think that's one of the most exciting things about working in a shared universe that's been in existence for so long. It's just like kind of, every story you do is just another brick in that wall, and I think it's really neat when you get to build on it.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. With Metamorpho, how did that story come to be? Did they come and pitch to you? Do you want to do a Metamorpho story? Was it a pitch you had for DC?
Last year at San Diego, I was talking with just different story ideas with the editor, Paul Kaminsky, and I had that idea about Metamorpho's dad, and just kind of the Indiana Jones of it all, because Rex has that in his roots, and just kind of finding a story to tell like that. It was my hope to do a longer story, and I think I have a longer story to tell with Rex and his father. But it's just finding a place for it. It's finding, it's not a lot of not a lot of demand for Metamorpho right now. Maybe after he appears in the Superman movie, it'll be more.
Yeah.
But then Metamorpho appeared in World's Finest, so Paul was like, "Hey, I think I found a spot for at least the root of this idea," and like he gave me 10 pages, and we figured it out.
Yeah, I definitely think there's probably going to be room for more Metamorpho. I've seen more people talking about him recently with all these stories that are coming out, him being in World's Finest and then this, and him showing up in the movie, like you said. I'm sure that, and I think there's people saying they think they're going to make a Terrifics, or maybe not a movie, but they'll at least be a team. That I definitely think there's going to be room for more Metamorpho stories in the near future.
Yeah, yeah. On a long enough timeline, I think every character
Mhm.
comes back into the spotlight.
Yeah, definitely. Where how long have you been reading for Metamorpho?
Reading Metamorpho stuff. I was reading. I really liked him when he was part of Justice League Europe back in the day. Like I read a bunch of that stuff. So I always had like an interest in that character. I think like he kind of went inert during Grant Morrison's JLA, and then it was the kind of weirdness with the other character that was like, what was that Outsiders character name? It's like Metamorpho, but it's like the not quite met version.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's like it was like a Metamorpho offshoot. He got
Mhm.
reabsorbed back into Metamorpho eventually. But I love him in Outsiders. I think he's an interesting character. He's uh, a similar vibe, I guess, as Cliff and Hellboy
Mhm.
and the thing. But I think he has a different energy just because like his powers require him to kind of be really smart with chemistry. And I don't know if people lean into that too hard, but it's like
Yeah,
that's he's always thinking of that stuff, like the different compounds and the way to make that work. It's something that Wade thinks about a lot, and he was actually really really helpful in a piece of that story with chemical compounds and stuff.
that's cool. Yeah. I've
Yeah.
the first I read with Metamorpho was also Justice League Europe. I'm a Flash fan, so I read that book because Wally's in it. But then as I was reading, I was like, Wally's kind of a jerk in this book. I'm liking this Metamorpho guy more right
Yeah,
now.
it was weirdly out of. Well, it was a different time for Wally. It was before
Yeah, at
Wade
that
got
time it was
involved
in
in doing
character.
stuff. Yeah. But it feels out of character now if you're a fan of the Wade stuff, especially.
Yeah, because
But
I went
yeah,
back to it after reading Wade and all of that, and I was like, who is this guy? But
yeah. That's a really fun book overall. Like,
it
there's a
is,
lot of
yeah.
good stuff happening in there. Yeah. Also interesting. There was a spin-off Metamorpho miniseries that came out of that book that was written by Wade, just to kind of loop it all and
Oh
tie it all
yeah.
back together. It was one of Wade's early writing assignments after he was editor. And he was also when Grant Morrison took over Doom Patrol. He was the editor on Doom Patrol.
Oh, that's cool.
Wade's got his he's got yeah he's got his fingers everywhere. He's all over
Yeah,
the
he's
place.
everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah. He
yeah,
said when I talked to him, he said that he's worked like literally every job in comics, even down to just stapling the pages together. It's crazy.
yeah, yeah. I think you'll find a lot of people that are really all in with comics. They've done a lot of things. I've worked. I was a weekend editor for Sci-Fi Wire, assigning stories to people to write about pop culture, including comics. But I've lettered comics. I'm currently editing Farrell
Mhm.
for Tony Fleece at Image Comics. And that's just because we were in a studio together, Burnham too, and he was looking for an editor, and I was like, "Oh, I'll do that." I mean, we're already talking about this story all the time anyway, so I might as well just jump in. Um, but yeah, I think even if you're just a writer that doesn't know how to draw, I this advice I give all the time, like make your own comic, even if you're doing it with stick figures, just to learn all the different parts. Because as soon as you're trying to make a comic with stick figures where you're trying to fit words and the stick figure in the box, you're gonna learn a lot in that short period of time. You're gonna learn like, oh, I'm writing too much. I'm putting too much in the balloons. Uh, there's all kinds of neat tricks. I think is anybody that's super serious about working in comics, just try to learn every part of the job, even if you're not good at it. Like I don't think I'm a great letterer, but I know how to do it. I've colored my own drawing work. I'm not as good of an artist as I want to be, but I know all these things, so I know when I'm writing uh or when like I'm working, is like I know what's happening down the line, so I can make sure that I'm kind of there for everyone else too.
Now you've done all this work with DC, all the creator-owned stuff you've talked about. You even have your own webtoon that. Do you have any other advice for people looking to break into the industry? Just
Yeah, speaking to the stick figure comic, the way I did it is something I did is basically I would advise you to keep like a journal comic. You don't just get a sketchbook. It can be like small 6x9, but just commit to doing one page that's 4 panels every day, even just for 30 days. And it's basically where you just try to find a moment in your life, whether something funny happens or something bad happens or something miserable happens, or it was just a really nice day and you did something cool. Try to find a way to tell that in 4 panels every day for 30 days, just one moment of your day. It's harder than you think. Even if you're doing stick figures, try to letter it yourself if you can. Like try to put the words that you're going to put in the balloons. You're going to learn so much about just the economy of the space you have, maybe you only use 3 panels. Maybe you try to make 5 panels fit on that tight space, but you've got a small space. You're trying to just really get one idea there. You will be astounded how much you learn in 30 days just about making comics. And you'll put things together. Uh, numerous people have done this in one form or another. A lot of comic writers have very crude web comics that they did when they were younger, and whether they knew it or not, they were training and
Mhm.
learning the process. And it's just like you start picking up your storytelling instincts that way, and you start learning just what you can and can't do in those panels, which is invaluable.
The last question that I have is now that like you've gotten to work in so many different corners of the DC universe at this point, are there any other characters or directions you kind of want to explore next? I know in Doom Patrol we got to see a lot of characters like Batman and Robin, Peacemaker, the Green Lantern Corps. Were these characters you brought in because you wanted to go further in with them? Are there other stories that you want to tell for those or maybe even other characters?
Some of it was just the needs of the story, I knew that I wanted this road trip issue where
Mhm.
Cliff was trying to get somebody across the country. And it was I had the basic ideas of the story, but then it was like, okay, well, what if it's a Starro, and which was a kind of a character that was left over from a pitch that Burnham and I did, Starbro. And I was like, well, what if it was Starbro? And it's like, so they're trying to, who would they hide that from? It's like, well, obviously it's Green Lanterns. And
Mhm.
it just like as it suggested it. And then, if I'm gonna use Green Lanterns, I'm gonna use my favorites. It's like
Yeah.
Guy and Kyle. And I just think they're a lot of fun. So it was kind of cool doing that. It comes from, I guess it comes from a love of the universe as a whole. And then it's less about like, oh, I really want to tell a Starman story, so I'm going to shoehorn Starman into this comic. It's more about like, I just know the universe and I love it, and so when I reach for, like, I'm reaching around for story, I know what's available and what can be used, and like putting them in places. I obviously would love to do a whole bunch of Batman stories. I think he's a great
Mhm.
character. I would love to have a chance at Superman and things like that. But it's, I love the shared DC universe. So it's like, if you just give me a corner and a character, I'll go to town. I'll figure it out. If I haven't read the comics already, I'll read them because I love it. And, I'll find the territory to mine and explore. That's half the fun, right? Like, it's just like getting those characters and putting them into interesting situations, and really drilling down on their characters. It was like when Josh Williamson and I wrote Justice League Incarnate, uh, the Superman from Earth 23, which is
Mhm.
essentially President Obama, but it's
Yeah.
President Superman. A lot of people call him. Uh, but he was in that book, and he was also Flashpoint Batman was in that book, and that was super interesting to me just because we've seen Superman and Batman together so many times, but it's completely different characters, and it's like normally Superman's a reporter. It's like now he's a politician. He's president. That's different. Normally Batman is, he's a billionaire playboy pretending to whatever. But Thomas Wayne's a surgeon. He's a doctor, and it's like having President Superman and Doctor Batman. Just like their attitudes, the way they approach problems is totally different, and it was such a neat dynamic. And it's like I always think about that stuff. That road trip comic for Cliff came from the idea that he drove race cars, and I was just like, well, Cliff's probably the best driver in the DC universe. Just like that sounds right. Like we could say
Yeah.
that. And then I was like, it was like, who better to drive you across country than Cliff? And it was just thinking about like these characters' backgrounds and their jobs and their parts of their life that we haven't seen yet. Like it just opens up pages and pages of comics,
Mhm.
and that's what I really get excited about, is just finding that new territory.
That's really cool. That's a great answer. You saying Cliff being the fastest driver in the DC universe and the best. In my head, someone's got to get Cliff behind the Batmobile in one of these comics. They got to let him
Right? Yeah,
take it around
yeah.
the block or something.
Or him in his car, souped up, racing the Batmobile. That's
Hmm.
a delightful idea. Like, just
Definitely.
a wacky racer situation where just all the drivers in the DC
Yeah.
universe. Yeah. There's definitely ideas there. But yeah, would love to see it. Like, and I think Cliff and Batman have an interesting chemistry too.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I when I have Flash writers on the show, I usually ask them what they think the Flash is listening to when he runs. So what do you think Cliff listens to while he's driving?
That's interesting. There's a really cute note in uh, it originally came from the Grant Morrison Doom Patrol. You know, like Cliff's always wearing all these different
Mhm.
T-shirts, and a lot of times they're bands and things like that. But in the show, it's just a one-liner, but it's basically Cliff mentions that all his T-shirts were given to him by Jane, and like so all those band T-shirts that
Mhm.
he would wear, Jane was basically giving him shirts to wear, and I think it's really a tender thing based on their relationship. Um, so I imagine, you know, the punk music that he might be, you know, based on any of the bands and those shirts that he wears, is just stuff that Jane's recommending to him, and just like, no, no, listen to this, listen to this, listen to
Yeah,
this. So I think it's like whatever mixtape or playlist that Jane has suggested to him at any given time, but it's probably punk of some sort,
Mhm.
you know, just or whatever she's getting into at the time is filtering through her and going to Cliff, and like I find that really just interesting to me. Like it was just, I don't know, for me, it like touched my heart. I was like, oh, she's giving him the shirts. That's so good. Like, you know, it was very subtle. They didn't make a big deal about it, but that's like, to me, that's, you know, that's love, you know, when somebody's like making those kind of suggestions to you.
definitely. Yeah, that's yeah, that's really good. That those two, that's one of my favorite dynamics on the team as well, between Cliff and Jane.
Yeah,
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions I have for today. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Everyone, make sure you go to your local comic shop, buy Unstoppable Doom Patrol. The trade's out. Tell DC that we want more because we do. Thank you so much for coming on the
Absolutely.
show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time.